Hello students, we have already started our first chapter, The Rise of Nationalism in Europe. Today in the second class of history, we will look into our second section, The Making of Nationalism in Europe. If you look at the map of mid-18th century Europe, that is this one, the map of Europe at that time was different from today's map. There were no nation-state. It was set as an empire. What we know today as Germany, Italy, and Switzerland, earlier these were divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons. What is the difference between kingdoms, duchies, and cantons? Listen very carefully. Kingdom is the land that is ruled by a king or queen. Duchies are the territories ruled by a duke or duchess. Now, who are duke and duchess? The prince after marriage is entitled as duke, and his wife is called as duchess. And cantons is a subdivision of territory that is established for administrative purpose. A diverse population lived within the territory of the eastern and the central part of Europe, which were under autocratic monarchies. People belonging to the respective region had their own identity and culture. They even spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. For example, the Habsburg Empire, which ruled over Austria and Hungary. There were different people living in different regions. Some aristocrats was predominantly German-speaking. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the others spoke a variety of dialects. In Galicia, which is here, Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. Besides these groups, there were also a large number of peasant people. So you see here, there lived people from different community with diverse ethnicity, culture, and spoke various language in different parts of the Europe. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. Then how did nationalism and the idea of the nation-state emerge? This we will see in the following subsection 2.1. That is, the aristocracy and the new middle class. What is aristocracy? It is a form of government in which power is held by the nobility. They are the rich people, or say high-class people. Socially and politically, a landed aristocracy was the dominant class on the continent. In a continent Europe, aristocrats owned a larger part of the land, even though their population was lesser. The members of this class, this high class, from different regions like France, Italy, Germany, Austria, they were united by a common way of life. They spoke French despite their regional dialects, for the purposes of diplomacy and in high society. Also, to maintain their status and class, their families were often connected by marrying the princess of a kingdom to the prince of the other kingdom. Whereas, on the other hand, the majority of the population was composed of the peasantry from the third estate. Some had land that was farmed by tenants, small owners, and serfs, where landless people, they would render their service to the landlords and cultivate in their land. If you remember the lesson French Revolution from class 9, in the third estate, there was 3 categories. First includes the businessmen, the educated people like lawyers, professionals, and also merchants. They were the more prosperous one than the other 2 categories. Now, in the Western and parts of Central Europe, the growth of industrial production and trade meant the growth of towns and the emergence of commercial classes whose existence was based on production for the market. Age of industrialization came. In England, industrialization began in the second half of the 18th century. But in France and parts of the German states, it occurred only during the 19th century. Industrialization brought emergence and growth of new social groups, one of which was the middle class people, which belonged to the upper class of the third estate. As they flourished and were prospering, they realized with time that they should fight for their right and have equal status in the society. It was through them the idea of national unity emerged. They were the liberal middle class who further became popular and abolished aristocratic privileges, such as birth privileges. Here the term liberal has been used. In the subsection 2.2, we will discuss what did liberal nationalism stand for in both political and economic sphere. Before going forward, let me tell you that there are some important dates given here in your book. These are very important. You have to remember this. Now, coming back to our next topic, that is, what did liberal nationalism stand for? So, the term liberalism has been derived from the Latin word liber, which means free. For the new middle classes, liberalism stood for freedom of the individual and equality of all before the law. The middle class group, they wanted to be free from the certain rules that dominated them from having views and opinions, and also they wanted equal law to be exercised as the upper classes. So, in a political sphere, there are few points. First is government by consent. People wanted a government that alone would not decide law for all, but there should be an agreement from different parties and should be for the betterment for all. Second is the end of autocracy. It means ending the one-man rule over all. In other words, end of monarchical government who owns all the powers in a single hand. And third is the end of clerical privileges. It means abolishing privileges that the church and its clergy had. Fourth is forming a constitution. There should be such government where in the constitution a representative government would be chosen by election, having one vote, one value per individual. And fifth point is the inviolability of private property. Here, right to own a private property was given importance. Yet, equality before the law did not necessarily stand for universal suffrage. Suffrage means the right to vote. Do you remember in French Revolution when without property and all women were excluded from political rights? They were categorized under passive citizens who were not allowed to vote. It was when Jacobins' club came to power that all adult males got the right to vote. But it was only for a short period of time. When the directory rule paved a way for Napoleon and he rose to power, the Napoleonic Code went back to limited suffrage and reduced women to the status of a minor. Women and men without property was again not given right to vote. So throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, women and non-propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. Liberalism in the economic sphere stood for the freedom of markets and the abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. For example, in a German-speaking region, in the first half of the 19th century, Napoleon's administrative measures had created out of countless small principalities a confederation of 39 states. Confederation means alliance. So there was 39 allied states which had its own currency and weights and measures. Suppose a merchant had to travel from Hamburg to Nuremberg, which is the state of Germany. To sell his goods, he had to pass through 11 custom barriers and pay a custom duty of about 5% at each one of them. Custom here means tax. As each region had its own system of weights and measures, this involved time-consuming calculation. Similar problem was faced in Europe. To overcome this problem, Zollverein was formed in 1834. Zollverein was a custom union which was formed initially by Prussia and then joined by most of the German states. This union abolished tariff barriers, the barriers that every checkpoint where the tax had to be paid. Also, number of currencies was reduced from over 30 to 2. It was done so because having many currencies at one country and having to change in different place was a problematic. And they also facilitated railway mobility for economic interest and unification because it was an easier means for the transportation of raw materials and also cheaper way. Economic nationalism at that time was developing the nationalist sentiments at large with the growing time. Now comes the third subsection, that is 2.3, a new conservatism after 1815. Till now we have discussed that the middle class wanted to end monarchy, but there were other groups who wanted it to restore. These people were conservatives. Conservatism is a political philosophy that believed and stressed on the importance of traditional institutions of state and society like the monarchy, the church, social hierarchies. Hierarchies means where the people are socially ranked into high class or lower class, and property and the family. They believed that it should be preserved. The conservatives wanted monarchy back, but with changes. They wanted to include some of the changes initiated by Napoleon, believing that the modernization would make state power more effective and strong. It was after the defeat of Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, European governments were driven by a spirit of conservatism. He was defeated collectively by the representative of the European powers, that is, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. In 1815, these representatives met at Vienna to make a new settlement for Europe. This meeting was called as Treaty of Vienna of 1815. The meeting, the Vienna Congress, was hosted by the Austrian Chancellor, Duke Metternich. The meeting was held with the objective to reorganize the changes made by Napoleon. Bourbon dynasty was restored to power, the dynasty which Louis XVI belonged to. A series of states were also set up on the boundaries of France to prevent French expansion in future. Prussia and Austria was also given some territories. Prussia was given important new territories on its western frontiers, while Austria was given control of northern Italy. But the German Confederation of 39 states that had been set up by Napoleon was left untouched. Their main intention was to restore the monarchies that had been overthrown by Napoleon and create a new conservative order in Europe. Hence, conservative regimes set up in 1815 were autocratic. They would not tolerate any criticism from any people. Censorship was also imposed again. The memory of French Revolution did not stop some people. Who were those people? They were the inspired liberals. They continued to raise their voice. One of the major issues taken up by the liberal nationalists who criticized the new conservative order was freedom of the press. So our next topic is going to be the revolutionaries that we will continue in the next class. Today we will stop here and we will meet again in the next class. Thank you.